report that's been released by UN Watch, which is into UNRWA schools in Palestine or in Gaza, and particularly into a Telegram group that's been found for the 3,000 teachers that UNRWA employs in the region, which has been found to be celebrating the October 7th attacks and all this kind of stuff. So I'll let our guests get into this a little bit more. Michael, what did you think about this when you saw all this?
Well, I think it's absolutely reprehensible, but at the same time, it doesn't really surprise me. As long as I've paid any attention to what's going on in Israel, I've heard stories about the educators in the Palestinian territories essentially brainwashing children to hate Jews, to hate Israelis. But this here goes beyond just the schools in Gaza. I looked into this a little today when the topic came up, and it turns out the same thing that was happening on the West Bank with these schools where they were celebrating this stuff and promoting it. And it also turns out that in 2018, as much as I hate to give him credit for anything, President Donald Trump cut the funding to this group, and then Joe Biden reinstated the funding for him. So it's deplorable what they're teaching. It's deplorable that it's under the UN sanction, and it's absolutely inexcusable that the United States is funding it.
Yeah. And then Jonathan, I'll come to you. So the one, what did you think about it? But is this news, or is this in Israel, is this pretty much known that this is what's been going on?
It's not news. Of course, it has been known for generations, and the title of the show, if you haven't changed it, is the success, right, of the Palestinian education system, and I think it's very aptly put. I think it's very successful. We can see October 7th being a great representative of how successful the education system in achieving its purpose, which is to raise generations of extremely devoted altruists, people who are willing to sacrifice themselves for a higher cause, that is the destruction of Israel. Now, I would like to point out the worst thing and the true moral crime, worse than crime, worse than moral crime, the actual crime, is that Israel is the country that had founded the Palestinian education system to begin with. If it won't be for Israel, who established the Palestinian Authority, who established the Palestinian sovereignty over the West Bank and over Gaza, there wouldn't have been a Palestinian education system to begin with. Not only that, while knowing that they are raising generations of Jew haters and Jew murderers, they are sponsoring them in the West Bank, and of course in Gaza, it's the whole thing. So the fact that Israel has allowed it to even happen to begin with, and then while knowing it was happening, continue to support and fund that, to give them also electricity and all the other stuff. So I would say Israel is the worst altruist in this, because not only Israel was sacrificing itself, it was sacrificing itself for those people who are, their whole purpose is to sacrifice themselves in order to annihilate Israel. So it's the worst kind of sacrifice for your worst enemies. And I think that's the worst part of this story.
Yeah, I think there's definite echoes of Rand's idea of the sanction of the victim going on there in what you're saying. And then John, I'll come to you as well. Was this a surprise to you, or is this pretty much what you'd expect?
Well, I had been following the UNRWA stories for a little while now, so it wasn't a surprise at all. It's just nice to see it come out clearly and nakedly for the useful idiots in the West to see. They need to see how they made this possible. It is truly disgusting, and it goes to show the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that more importantly or deeply is the fact that this is such a good example of how the evil only survives by manipulating the good, and or guilting the good, however you want to look at it. This would not have been the problem it had been if we didn't help the evil thrive. It's so simple. And, other than that, I completely agree with Michael and Jonathan on all the other points. So I don't know. It's the Palestinian death cult was nurtured by the good, by the UN, by Israel, by the US, the West in general.
Yeah. And so I guess if anyone's new to the UNRWA stories, we've been doing a few of them on the channel recently, but I appreciate a lot of people don't spend their life looking at all these sub-agencies of the United Nations. So it's the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, I believe is the full name. And they particularly have this kind of mandate over the area to take care of Palestinian refugees. And the way they define a refugee is either anyone who lived within what's now, I guess, Gaza or the West Bank, or who was displaced from their Palestinian who was displaced from their home between the 1st of June, I think it's 1946, to then 1948, or anyone who's then a child of someone who was counts under that definition. So they count that there's 5.6 million Palestinian refugees in the world, which is quite a remarkable high number. And I think points to the fact that they're working on a kind of faulty understanding of what a refugee is. And the only person who can actually get them to change this definition is the General Assembly. So it's going to take, all the members of the United Nations, in effect, working in unison to get that changed. So, Michael, I'll come back to you. What do we do about organizations like this? And maybe that raises questions about the United Nations in general. So, I'm pretty sure you think we shouldn't be in the United Nations. Is that right?
It is right. Why would, if we claim to be in the United States here, a beacon of liberty and we're the good guys, what the hell are we doing in an organization with the Russians, the Chinese, Cubans? I mean, nothing to do with their ethnicities or respective nationalities, but the governments in those countries are horrible. But we're going to go and have a meeting and act as if they're going to say something rational or they're going to have something productive to contribute. It's absolutely absurd. And then, like I said, to find out that we fund this stuff when it's nothing new. I mean, it might be new to, the world at large about what's being taught in Palestinian schools. But I think Jonathan could probably comment. As far back as I remember, they were teaching in these schools that the Israelis want to kill Arab children and drink their blood, all kinds of crazy, wacky stuff that they're teaching. And then to think, well, maybe the UN under their auspices will give them some money and things will improve. I mean, it's idiotic is what it is. I don't know how else to put it. Yeah.
Well, and then Jonathan, to come to you then. What's going on in Israel right now in terms of about the United Nations? Are there conversations about Israel leaving the United Nations, given how much the United Nations is kind of undermining Israel's efforts?
Yeah, so there's a lot of most of the conversation now is about the issue with the Hague trial. Am I frozen? I don't see you guys.
I've got you lagging a little bit, but yeah, I can still hear you.
So the most of the drama is about the Hague thing in the UN. They're less talking about the education system because everybody knows about it. It's not a big deal. It's not a big surprise. The big surprise now, people have actually realized that it means something. The fact that they teach their children to kill Jews actually makes them go and kill Jews in bulk numbers. That's the surprise. Some people are somehow surprised by that, but I think also the problem with the UN is their lack of response to all the women organizations that have not come out and talk about all the rape and all the terrible atrocities that Hamas and the Palestinians perpetrated on October 7th. So I would say that's the main focus rather than the UNRWA thing, because they don't really expect them to change anything.
Well, and so what do you think we should do about UNRWA and the United Nations? How do we go about affecting change? Because basically we've done a few shows on UNRWA now, and we're pointing out just how terrible a lot of this stuff is. And in my view, and I don't think this is controversial, that basically what's at the root of a lot of this conflict is just anti-Semitism. And if basically the teachers of the future of the next generation of Gazans, of kids in the West Bank, whatever, are teaching them anti-Semitic tropes right out of the medieval period, as Micah was saying, the idea, the blood libel kind of stuff. Oh, Jonathan's gone. Oh, and he's back. Can you hear me, Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the last sentence, please?
Yeah, sure. I was saying basically, my view is that a lot of this stuff, a lot of the conflict is the root of the motivation is in anti-Semitism. And if the teachers of the next generation of Gazans, of kids in the West Bank, wherever, are teaching them anti-Semitic tropes straight out of the Dark Ages, that's obviously a real problem. So, I was asking Michael, in effect, what do we do about the UN? But particularly, what do we do about the UN? But then what do we do about UNRWA? How do we go about affecting change?
Well, the best way to affect change in UNRWA is to obliterate all their buildings in Gaza to begin with, which the IDF is working on, thankfully, and then advocate for the philosophical foundation behind why it's immoral this whole thing is, like we're doing on this channel, and advocate for disbanding this organization alongside all the international ridiculous organizations that they have no moral standing. That's, I think, what we should focus on, the lack of any ethical validity to this idea that they somehow should they also can affect change from above. If the UN comes to a place that doesn't have any cultural appreciation for the ideas of liberty, of property rights, of even basic individual liberties, there's just no way. If you just come, even if you have good program in the school, it's still not enough. There needs to be a more fundamental change, and it has to start with philosophy. But that's, I think, very far away, unfortunately.
Yes, I kind of agree. And so, John, just the same question, really. How do we go about affecting change? I mean, because Rand was writing about the United Nations, how long ago now? Decades ago. So clearly, the objectivist movement hasn't been very effective in tearing down the walls of the United Nations, right? So how do we go about this? Because I think we're all agreed, basically, that the United Nations is an organization that is no good. So how do we do it?
Well, I think one of the primary reasons Rand wasn't taken seriously is because she was accused of hyperbole, like they can't truly be this bad. They do some good stuff and blah, blah, blah. Well, this new report is the proof that she needed to show the West. And I think that's what we need to push, especially in America, because we have the largest economy. It will be the greatest impact on things if we can convince enough Westerners how evil or how much evil UN makes possible. And, decades of the UN funding this kind of stuff, and now you see the consequences of it all. And it's just pure cult indoctrination that the UN has been funding for decades. And this is going to take decades to fix. You look at any information about cults that have succeeded in the past and everything, and they use education to cripple the minds of their children so that they can gain the obedience that they need from them. It is cult 101. So, yeah, I think spreading this news, this information, concrete facts about what UNRWA is teaching or the UN is funding or whatever, to as many Westerners as possible is not going to be a fix overnight, but I don't see any other way of crippling the support that Hamas has.
Yeah.
I also want to recommend people read an article by Rand called The Comparticos. I was hoping to get a chance to read it before this, but now I'm going to go read it, I think, after this. And she lays down, how easy it is to cripple the mind of a child, and that happens in the education system more often than not, and the Palestinian education system is the example of the worst of that type of crippling of the mind.
Yeah, that's actually, do you know what? That's one of the essays by Rand that I've not got around to reading. But I think it's named after one of Victor Hugo's, I think it's The Man Who Laughs or something. There's a group of child snatchers called the Comprachicos, right? So that's where that comes from.
And they are
Um,
a real phenomenon, apparently, the Chicos.
Really? Ah, there you go. Well, that's very, very much Hugo's kind of thing, I suppose, isn't it?
Heard is it's a cultural monstrous tradition of, I may be remembering this completely wrong, but of putting children into ceramic jars to keep their body from growing. That's
Ah, okay.
the base I can remember. Kind of like foot binding in Japan and stuff like that.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm glad that in contemporary Europe we don't do that anymore. Uh, so I can't remember how I was going to launch into this point, but basically, I've been saying that I think a lot of this is rooted in anti-Semitism, and there's been some very interesting work that's been done for a while by the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, that's called I always forget the name. It's like the ADL 100 or something, where they basically take surveys of regions of the world and gauge kind of degrees of anti-Semitic attitudes there. And for North Africa and the Middle East, based on their polling, based on their surveying, of the 275 million people that they polled, 200 million of them qualified as basically holding anti-Semitic attitudes. So that's a huge proportion of that region are holding these kind of views. And if I'm right, and I think I am, that it's these attitudes which are ultimately motivating people into anti-Semitic acts just on the individual level, but then also these kind of wars that are breaking out. That's a real problem. And so we need to go about changing on these things to the extent that you can. So basically that's my question. Like, what do you guys think about how do you change someone who's rooted in such a kind of primitive kind of bigotry? How do you change someone's mind? Because as you pointed out, Michael, it's blood libel right from the year 1100, basically, the idea of Jews drinking blood. So how do we do that? I mean, Michael, I'll come around to you again. Like what do you do about it?
I haven't got the slightest idea. I'm not at all confident that just because this came out, anybody in the West is going to change their minds about the UN or funding the UN. I mean, we can see it with how many people are out there protesting in favor of Hamas, and that's just, what we might call the extreme wing. Never mind the people that just, casually make comments or answer to the surveys like the one that you just mentioned. So those people probably think, well, yeah, they're going to teach them to celebrate that. Like we teach in America, you celebrate the 4th of July. You know what I mean? So I'm not optimistic in the least bit. I do think that John is right. It ultimately comes down to philosophy. The question is, how do you convince enough people of a rational philosophy if they're not already rational to begin with? And I don't know the answer. I wish I did, because I spend a considerable amount of my time trying to promote it. But if somebody doesn't want to think, what can you do?
Mm. Yeah, it's a difficult question, isn't it? Jonathan, again, I'll come around to you. Like, how does Israel do this one? Can Israel do anything in a sense because they're the object of the hatred? Maybe there's literally nothing that Israel can do. But my view of how people are talking a lot about how the need for a peace settlement, for long-term peace, and so on. And it's frustrating me that there's basically no talk of changing the attitudes in the region, because as I said, I think that's what's motivating it. So yeah, so what can be done?
So at this point, I'm afraid less can be done. But I think it's important to mention that if following October 7th, Israel would have had a much stronger reaction, then everything would have been much different, because they would see that we are non-negotiable. We have a principle. We're principle, and when you're dealing with a principled person, you step back for a second. Okay, he's serious about this. The moment we agreed for the truce, we had what was it, 10-day truce. We agreed for the trucks. We agreed for it. Shows that we are ready to cave. We are ready to negotiate and compromise. So of course the hatred towards Israel is only growing because they see that it works. the more protests, the more pressure the international community applies on Israel, the more Israel is prone to caving. So because Israel is weak, the more anti-Semitism and the more anti-Israel you will see around the world. If Israel was strong, if Israel was principled, if Israel would have done its moral duty to protect its citizens, then it would have been much more difficult for these ugly anti-Semites to raise their heads, because they would have been in the losing side. They would have been on the weak side, and they wouldn't dare. Now they're daring because they smell blood, they smell weakness.
And then just, I guess, the next thing is, if we had someone here from the other side of this argument, in fact, someone in the West, maybe someone who's working at some of the mainstream news sources, I think there's a common basically rebuttal to what you just said, which is they basically say that the strength of Israel's response is what is going to engender further resentment. And
Yeah,
what do you make about that?
That's because the US dropped an atomic bomb on Japan, and that made Japan more aggressive towards the US. No, it pacified them. Well, when the Brits destroyed Dresden, did it make the Germans more aggressive, more anti-Britain when they did that? Where is the historical precedent for that statement? I don't see that.
Well, fair enough. And John, again, the same thing. I guess I'm always asking you guys the same question: what can we do about it? Like, about anti-Semitism in the region? Because Michael's making a salient point, which is that basically these attitudes are so regressive in the sense that they're right out of the Dark Ages, and the West has gotten itself into a lot of trouble, in effect, by trying to foist our values onto some of these people, because you can't force them, basically. So what do we do?
Keep fighting for the proper arguments and the truth, because it's the next generation we're going to have to capture. This whole discussion shows the power of education, and that's what we probably need to focus on. I think a lot in the current generation, or the older generations who are hardcore anti-Semitic, are lost. And Michael's right, there is no convincing them. So there is nothing you can do other than wait for them to die, or wait for them to initiate force on me so I can defend myself against them. But when the world is run by altruists, it's hard to defend yourself. And I think that's why Westerners think that this kind of stuff makes more terrorists, because of the fact that Israel doesn't just stand up, and they are getting a lot of support from the rest of the world. So it's kind of a half war. And so that's what creates possibly more terrorists, whereas in Japan and Germany, it was a full-on war. We knew what we were fighting, or we admitted what we were fighting. Now I think we're too scared to admit the depth of what we have to fight. And so our whole concern is de-escalation.
I think, what you and Jonathan have said, which is that at least in the short term, there needs to be a strong military response. I think that's true. So there's a guy that I quite like who's called Mark Regev. I've spoken about him on the channel before, who used to be the Israeli ambassador to the UK. Now I think he's an advisor to Netanyahu or something like that. But he's often on UK media kind of sticking up for Israel when it's not someone like Elon Levy or the Israeli ambassador. And he gets a lot of, if I can say shit on the channel, shit thrown at him by the interviewers, because he'll say things like, well, what's needed is basically a system of re-education for the people in Gaza. Now, re-education, I think, is a word which, to a lot of Westerners, sets off alarm bells, because it sounds kind of like indoctrination or something like that. But I kind of, like you might imagine, I have a lot of sympathy with this point, because if it's re-educating people out of anti-Semitism, then surely that's not a bad thing. So, do you think that has any chance of working? Do you think you can re-educate people out of these ideas? And that can go to any of you who have anything to say, basically.
What I'd say about it is you're ultimately talking about religious fanatics, and it's not politically correct to identify religion for what it is. Religion is an irrational, toxic influence on culture. And to the degree that it's the more extreme it is, the worse it is. But even in America, we can see with the vehement opposition to gay marriage, for instance, or this hatred for transsexuals. And I'm not talking about the people who just say, look, I think that there's no such thing, as a non-binary person, or if you're born a man, you're a man. I'm talking about the people that it's like vitriolic, their hatred that stems from a religious base. And if that happens here, I mean, where we're not like just totally blitzed with that stuff, imagine being raised with it, from when you're knee high to a grasshopper, it just having this stuff rammed in your head, faith in God, then you pile on top of that with hate the Jews, hate the Jews. And what do we think we're going to get? But well, I mean, I can, and I'm sure you guys can too, but in polite society, these are things you really can't talk about. People, I mean, I suppose you could, but people would just walk away from you and they don't want to hear it. But I think that it's time to start to identify religion for what it is. Like there's that thing where they would say, "Oh, but it's not Islam; it's just the extremists." Well, it's not. I would go so far as say it's not Islam; it's religion. Period. And some it's true are more advanced than others, and some are more toxic right now than others. But ultimately, any ideology that's rooted in shutting off your mind and putting your faith in things you can't see or prove, I think is just toxic, and that might be the biggest hurdle that we need to overcome.
Yeah, I'm reading a book at the moment by Dave Rich, who's an academic in the UK who writes about anti-Semitism, and he published this book I think in December, so just a month ago. It's called Everyday Hate, and it's about anti-Semitism in the UK nowadays, and talks about the history of anti-Semitism in the UK because unfortunately we were sort of innovative in anti-Semitism. We sort of upgraded the anti-Semitism that already existed. And part of the book that frustrated me is he's talking about the history of anti-Semitism, and it's deeply involved in Christianity and the monks of the early medieval period. And he keeps saying that he doesn't want to kind of slander Christians or Christianity. And whilst you might not want to say any particular Christians today are anti-Semites, there's a reluctance in his book, I think, to say that religion is deeply involved in this. Even though he's saying a lot of stuff which I think support that conclusion. So I do agree with you, Michael. I mean, Jonathan and John, because we'll eventually move on to the next topic. What do you make of that? Do you think religion is the cause or deeply involved, or do you think it's something else?
Goes first.
Whoever is the most eager to speak.
I think mysticism is more aptly put. Mysticism and collectivism. That I think what you should name. And collectivism is better because there are also non-religious Jew-hating organizations, Israel destroying seekers in the Palestine. The PLO started as a secular movement, so it's not exclusively religion, but it is exclusively collectivism and hatred of Jews. So I would say that's more accurate.
And John?
Yeah, I agree with both of them. It's a mix of, collectivism and faith and religion. I think being brought up of any faith, though, makes you more susceptible to collectivism and tribalism and things like that, because it's all based on memorizing, not understanding. So you just kind of regurgitate all these things you were pounded with when you were a kid in an attempt to not let you understand. And I do think that it is possible to undo a hardcore anti-Semites logic. And it's extremely rare and difficult, but I'm basing this on this guy from the 70s who I don't remember his name or many details, but he would go, families would hire him to go and save their family members from cults. And so he would go and grab these people out of a cult, and he would have to literally lock them away with him for weeks and just pound them with reality. And eventually it was what broke them of their cultish thinking. And he was able to do this on many occasions. And then, of course, the left gets on him and he's ridiculed. And so it all fits perfectly. But I'm just saying it is possible to re-educate people. It's just really difficult and time consuming. I kind of analogize it to Christmas lights. You know, your Christmas lights from last year, you just let them lay there, you didn't tend to them. And now this year they're all tangled in a mess. And how long does it take you to untangle that? It was almost no effort for them to become tangled. It just happened. But to untangle them takes, you know, a lot of time and focus and concentration. So it's kind of like that. It's really hard to do, but it's possible. It's just way better and more efficient to start with the education at the beginning.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
delegitimizing faith is a huge, you know, people give it way too much of the benefit of the doubt and then write off certain things it does.
yeah, I guess a story that comes to mind a lot in these kind of things is of Yeonmi Park's story about escaping from North Korea. I don't know if you guys have gone and heard that, but basically she escaped into China. Then I think she ended up in Mongolia, if I'm sort of remembering her story correctly. And basically the Mongolian government puts her and other North Koreans who've escaped into re-education clinics or camps or whatever, basically telling them that, you know, the leaders of North Korea are not superhumans, that North Korea hasn't done X, Y, and Z, that the birds didn't sing when Kim Jong-un was born or whatever. And basically she describes their reaction as being kind of incredulous, and not so much incredulous that these kind of miracles can't happen that the state had told them they did, but basically their whole kind of epistemological worldview was kind of torn down around them, because basically if the whole world that they grew up in was lying to them, how do they not know that these people are now lying to them? They're kind of driven into a kind of skeptical point of view. And I think it's probably really tough for people to go through that and to come out of it. But then also, in a sense, Yeonmi Park is some of the great evidence of how people can come out of that kind of stuff. But I'm digressing a little bit. But maybe just before we go on to the next topic, I kind of want to say, because we're talking about changing the minds of religious people in the Middle East, which is obviously a heavily religious area. And that's something that's spoken about a fair bit, to some degree amongst the New Atheists by kind of Sam Harris or Ayan Hirsi Ali, and the idea of a reformation in Islam. Now, I always feel a bit of despair when they talk about that, because that just seems so impossible to me about bringing about. But do you think that's possible? Because basically that's what's going to be required if we achieve what we want, what we're talking about here. Michael, do you think?
As long as human beings have free will, it's possible. Likely, I don't think so. But I would just like to add that I think religion is even a detriment on the side of Israel's defenders. I mean, how many of Israeli supporters in America are doing it because they're Christians and they think that Israel's promised to Jews by God? And even in how many Jews believe that? And if that's going to be your argument, if you tell somebody, well, of course it belongs to Israel, God gave it to him, and then the other guy says, oh, no, that's Muslim holy land, God wants us to have it. How do you win that argument ever? Instead of arguing for Israel based on its Enlightenment ideals, people argue for it based on religious ideals, and it's just not a winner.
And well, Jonathan, then I want to ask you. I hear very few people who are also consider themselves to be pro-Israeli, to make the case in the way that we might make it coming from an objectivist perspective. Often people will say something kind of religious, like this is the land of the Jews, or the best secular case you kind of get is, I guess, there needs to be a Jewish state so that Jews can escape persecution. But often you do hear this kind of religious attitude, which is kind of like I guess, manifest destiny kind of attitude. Is that very common in Israel, or is it something else?
Of course, it's a big deal, and people say that, it's basically what you guys said. It's our land. We've lived here for 3,000 years. That's our home because it says so in the Bible, and all that nonsense. Yeah, all that nonsense. So yeah, it's very common, and that's why one of the reasons I think the objectivist approach to this could be really popular in Israel itself. That's why I think Iran started doing his shows in Hebrew, but I think it could be big because people have a cognitive dissonance. People in Israel who want to be pro-Israel, but they are secular, they kind of have a cognitive dissonance because they tend to buy into the leftist approach to Israel, that there should be a two-state solution, and it's all very moral equivalence. They need a moral justification for Israel. So I think it's very important that we continue to do this work, and especially in Israel, because by the end of the day, Israel is the country that really has the ability to make this change, and also affect the entire Muslim world, I think, by extension. So yeah, it is unfortunately common, this view.
And then John, basically on before we go to the next topic, what do you think about anything we just said, particularly, I guess, about the Reformation in Islam kind of idea?
Yeah, it's like Michael said, we have free will, it's possible. It's going to be very challenging. But I think knowing how bloody and violent Christianity was and that they could do it, gives me hope for Islam. But we need to get the West and the good side to be more confident. And I think starting in Israel is a great place. If Israel isn't even going to get out of the UN or whatever, then how are we ever going to convince an American to do it? Like they need to leave, and that would be their first stand of real courage. And I think it would give other countries courage to leave too. Then, like Poland's talked about it, I believe, and
there was a Polish guy who stood up and said some quite impressive stuff about EU membership, United Nations membership, wasn't it?
Okay, if I may add on the Arabs getting a reformation, Arabs in Israel, I would say, are the most Western Arabs probably in the world. They are very, very different from Arabs in the rest of the Middle East, and I think it's one of the reasons also that Hamas and these friends also murdered Arabs when they did the October 7th massacres. So Arabs and things that I've witnessed in my own personal life here in Israel. I've worked in a supermarket, in a supermarket, in a minimum wage job. You're working with everyone. You're working with Arabs. You're working with Jews. Everybody works together. And we share a very common language. There isn't really any difference between us, which I think is amazing, and really one of the biggest signs that Israel is a true Western country, is a true shining beacon on the hill here. And it's true that there are still Arabs living in their villages and their very close communities, but their sons and daughters, some of them go to marry Jews. So they go and live in cities, unlike staying in the village. So there's definitely something like that going on in Israel. And as I said, if Israel is successful, more will happen of that in the Middle East.
Well, and then maybe just a final question on this. Because those people are, like you said, the sons and the daughters are presumably picking up implicitly a kind of liberal orientated dose of individualism from the kind of Western attitude that they're getting in Israel then. And something that's on my mind very much is that for there to be a future society, excuse me, in places like Gaza or the West Bank, you're going to need leaders who are minded to be pro-Israel, basically. It can't be. So one of the things that's been spoken about is that, I can't remember who was saying this, but once the war winds down in Gaza, there needs to make way for elections so there can be, new leaders elected. But basically, if it's the current population voting, then what's going to happen is presumably they're going to elect the same kind of people as they elected before. Do you think there would be people in a sense, the Israeli government could kind of parachute in some of the kind of Arabs from Israel? And I say Arabs just because I think the people in Gaza would be more amenable to being ruled by someone who's of the same kind of ethnic background as them compared to an Israeli who they would probably just be resentful of. Do you think there's a chance of that? And maybe it's something you don't know, in which case you can just say so, but do you think that's possible?
I don't think I can really say, honestly. a lot of Arabs living in Israel are supporting Zionist parties like Likud, for example. And so possibly some of these kinds of people could talk to the people in Gaza, but I don't really know, and I don't honestly think so. It'll take a long time before something like that could really happen.
Okay, fair enough. I'm asking questions about pay grade occasionally. Okay, so our second topic, is and actually something I was going to say, because John made a point about we were talking about the Reformation, and maybe I shouldn't feel so gloomy. If I were sitting in pre-Reformation Europe, I'd probably feel pretty gloomy about the chances of things changing, but things do, so maybe I should be less gloomy. But our next topic is pretty gloomy, so we'll be gloomy again. And it's about the case that South Africa has brought against Israel at the International Court of Justice. The particular article I sent to you guys about it was that Jeremy Corbyn has signed up to support this case. And, Jeremy Corbyn's this British former Labour Party leader who's really charming and definitely doesn't hold any anti-Semitic views at all. But, we can talk about Jeremy Corbyn if you guys have anything to say about that. But about the case that South Africa's brought, I'll come back to you, Jonathan, as well, since you're the first Israeli we've had to speak on about it. What's the feeling in Israel about this case?
So people, the media, I would say, in Israel take it very seriously. They think that this is a real danger. They are worried about the worst case scenario. They just before entering, I watched it on the news. They say that we are worried that The Hague will order the war to stop, as if they have some authority to just make the war stop. And they're worried that The Hague will decide to arrest soldiers when they enter European countries because of their war crimes and all that bollocks. Sorry, I'm not allowed to say that word. So
no, you can. Yeah, we can swear on here, I'm pretty sure.
So yeah, and also I would say they also like to add that there are a lot of irresponsible Israeli politicians whose statements have been recorded and will be presented as evidence. For example, people who have said, rightly so, that Israel should encourage voluntary migration out of Gaza, and they are worried that such statements would be used against us in this court. So there's a lot of drama, at least in the media, and a lot of outcry about that. I would like to add about the Hague, which is, I think, is a very amusing topic for me. The idea that first, why does a country exist? Why do we need a country? We need a country to protect its citizens' rights, right? That's why countries are formed. Now, the idea of an international court means that a country needs to give up, to compromise on its role, on its moral obligation for something other than its role. So Israel needs to give up on my security so that people in Hague and people from South Africa would be pleased. And they don't even have any standings, the South Africans who are prosecuting us. It's so ludicrous. So I think the fact that we are even participating in this thing is a moral abomination. And this whole operation, and also my tax money is funding Israel's illegal delegation to The Hague, which is also, I think, an abomination. So the whole thing is absurd. It's an entire circus. And but I'm not a legal expert, so maybe you guys know better.
Well, no, I basically, I think I agree with everything you just said, although I'm not a legal expert anyway, so maybe that doesn't matter. So Michael, what do you think about this case? Have you followed it since it's come into the news, but also why do you think South Africa's doing this?
Well, I'm just reassured in my belief that if you talk long enough, it'll always come back to your tax dollars going to fund something, because Jonathan is not happy about that. I don't know much about this. I don't know what. I mean, ultimately, The Hague, I've heard stories where they charge people before. Nothing really ever comes of it. I don't think that we're going to end up seeing Israelis dragged before the International Criminal Court and in prison. South Africa, why they support it, I don't know. I mean, I know what the theory is. The idea is that they've got a history of apartheid over there, and while they had it under, when Nelson Mandela was their inspiration, sort of. He had some ideas about what was happening in Israel, and they think that Israel's committing the same types of acts that the white South African government was committing. I don't know why they think that. I don't know, how much studying they've done, but they seem to believe it, and that seems to be why they're fighting. Unless, of course, there's some nefarious motive where they're being dishonest and trying to curry favor with somebody, which I don't know anything about that either. So my short answer, Morgan, is I really don't know what I'm talking about here. So
Well, never. It's still. I'm glad to get an answer anyway. I guess what I find mystifying about, I mean, you're right that they've basically openly said in that the motivation is due to the history of apartheid, and that's something that they throw at Israel as well, that Israel's engaged in apartheid. So that seems to be why it's coming from South Africa. But also, I'm mystified partly just about why they're bringing it to this particular court, because the International Court of Justice doesn't have any kind of ability to prosecute Israel. It can basically pass an opinion. It can say Israel's doing something bad or Israel's perfectly justified, but there's no consequence of that against Israel. Apparently, basically the reason why they're raising it at this court is because Israel has signed up to the convention, so is accountable to this court, but there's no consequence if Israel is found guilty by the court. So I guess it's just PR. I suppose. John, what do you think about this, or about Jeremy Corbyn, or any of it?
It's all pretty disgusting. I mean, I don't know a lot about these issues either. I don't know much about South Africa, but I do believe that Nelson Mandela did make statements about Palestine and how it was similar to South Africa apartheid. I don't know what his reasoning was for that or anything like that, but he was obviously wrong, so it doesn't matter. But I wish that the Israelis would not even show up at this court, and so as to not give it any legitimacy, because it's what they seek the most is legitimacy and validation for their views. Yeah, and I don't know, like you said, what standing does South Africa have in this to bring charges against Israel? Can any country that's part of this court bring charges against another country for something that they don't like? I don't know. Is this court part of the UN, or is this a separate entity? That's one thing I was not clear on.
Do you guys have any notion about what their exact? I think they are basically a byproduct of the UN, right? They're separate from the International Criminal Court, but they're one of the kind of boils which grows on the neck of these massive organizations, it seems like. Do you guys know anything more about it, or no? Okay. Let me just do the super chats just before we get into the final 10 minutes. So we've got $5 from Jonathan. Thank you so much, Jonathan. 3 Canadian dollars from Jeff Bannister, who's been a member for 20 months, and says that Memory TV has done much to expose what is taught in those schools. That sounds very good. I don't know. I've never come across that group before, so that sounds interesting. Daniel's telling me it's one of the 6 principal organs of the UN. It settles disputes between states in accordance with international law and gives advisory opinions on international legal issues. Okay, I knew the second bit. Okay, so it's one of the principal organs of the UN. There you go. So it's a UN court. And then Frank Grail gives $2 and asks, why does the left love this Edward Said? Who is he? I have a fair bit I can say about Edward Said. I don't know if you guys have strong opinions about Edward Said, but I can just launch into all the things I have to say about him.
I've heard of him, and now I'm drawing a blank. So I would love if you would launch into a diatribe, and maybe it'll jog my memory.
So Edward Said is a Palestinian intellectual who's dead now. He died a bit over, I want to say he died about 22 years ago. And he wrote probably one of the most influential academic works of the last 100 years. He wrote Orientalism. And then he wrote a follow-up to it, which I think was called Culture and Empire. So he's basically kind of the main thinker in post-colonial thought. So to answer Frank's question, why does the left love him? Because the left is, very much endeared to post-colonial critiques. And Edward Said is kind of the main theorist there. The ultimate kind of founder of post-colonial theory is a guy whose name I'm completely blanking on, but who wrote a book called Black Skin, White Masks. never mind. That was in the 50s. He was a psychologist. Maybe I'll remember who that is, or maybe Daniel can look that up for me. But Said came about later than that, in about the 70s. He wrote Orientalism. And Orientalism is a critique of Western media and its attitudes towards basically everywhere outside of Europe. So it can be pertaining to North America, South America, the Middle East, Africa, Oceania, basically, yeah, anywhere that's not European. And the Orientalist critique, which is a critique which has some validity, although I've got a lot of problems with it, is basically about the idea of how people in the West perceive the Orient, so perceive it as exotic, sexually available, brutal, savage. So a lot of the critique that comes about against the word savagery, for example, comes from Edward Said. And it's this kind of thing. It's a critique about the way people use language and how that confers power, and it's all that kind of stuff. And that's a lot of the stuff that drives post-colonialism. And he was big friends with people on the left. So he was friends with Christopher Hitchens before they got into an argument just before he died. And Hitchens wrote a rather nasty obituary about him just as he was on his deathbed, and so on and so forth. So that's Edward Said, and that's why the left love him so much. Right. Anyway, so let's get back to the main thrust of this then. So I kind of hand waved aside Jeremy Corbyn's role in all this, and the reason why this was back in the news, although it's been continuously in the news, is that Jeremy Corbyn has signed up to this. Now, Jeremy Corbyn is a guy who isn't a politician in any of your guys' country. Good for you. He is a politician in mine. Do you guys have any views about Jeremy Corbyn? Does he filter out to you guys much?
Only since I've been on this show, but from what I've seen, he's reprehensible. I find it just mind-boggling how, like, over and over again, that this guy has said things and then had to, oh no, I didn't mean it, or walk it back and that sort of thing. But even if this was an unjust war on Israel's behalf, right? Why is it with people like Jeremy Corbyn that that's where they always go? There's injustices happening all over the world all the time. But every time Israel's involved in anything, it seems, you end up with a string of people coming out to condemn Israel. And then they swear, no, it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. But yet they're not too concerned with what the Chinese are doing to I forget what they're called, the Uyghurs. I'm probably butchering it over there, or what's happening in the Sudan with the whatever they're called. I can't remember. What Al-Shabaab, I think what they were over there. They're somewhere, I don't know. No, the Janjaweed, I think they were called. But anyways, there was a lot of this sort of stuff goes on throughout the world that people don't seem to care about. But Israel responds to a vicious attack, and they're lining up in droves to condemn them. But swear it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And he just seems to fit that profile. I might be wrong. For all I know, this guy's out there protesting every war that ever took place. But from what I've seen, it's Israel that seems to be the target of his vitriol.
Yeah. No, I mean, he does have this general kind of anti-war, kind of peacenik, slightly hippie-ish kind of persona. But no, you're right that I think especially the left, especially in Britain and perhaps in the West in general, but especially in Britain, gets very agitated and vocal around this particular dispute. And it's an interesting question. I think some of it does have roots in an anti-Semitic kind of thought, because you're right that Corbyn basically says a lot of stuff which walks right up to the line of anti-Semitism, or actually echoes some of the kind of the more rank verbiage of anti-Semitism. So, for example, in 2012, there was an attack on Iran, I think it was something like that, and he was interviewed on TV, and he says, "I can see the hand of Israel in this attack," and it's kind of mimicking a kind of conspiratorial kind of thinking, right? Israel had nothing to do with this, but he just kind of thought it was appropriate to mouth off about that Israel was secretly behind the scenes orchestrating all this kind of stuff. So no, I think you're right about that. Jonathan and John, does Jeremy Corbyn foist his way into your everyday lives?
I can tell you about the Israeli version of Jeremy Corbyn. If you heard about him, his name is Ofer Kassif. He's a member of the Knesset, parliament member. and he's signed a petition that he supports the South African charges on Israel, and member of our parliament. And he supports an immediate ceasefire and everything. I think morally is worse than Corbyn, because it's his own country that he's betraying. He's a Jew, and is a self-proclaimed communist. Is a member of the Israeli Communist Party, which is also an Arab party. So they have 4 Arab members and 1 communist one, and he's the communist delegate. And he's a really despicable human being. Whenever there are a lot of instances where there was like a terrorist attack, and he went to the hospital to visit the terrorist who was injured, not the person that he. So he's a really despicable human being. Is our Jeremy Corbyn.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard of that guy before. So then, John, does Jeremy Corbyn make it into the news over in the US? There was a big comparison when he was leader of the Labour Party of him and Bernie Sanders, because they kind of were getting into the news at the same time, and they kind of, I guess, look similar and have both kind of socialistic politics. What do you make of Corbyn? Do you come across him often?
No, I don't come across him very often, at least in American news or discussions or anything. This channel in the last, couple months, it's where I've heard of him the most. And yeah, he sounds like a truly disgusting person. And he's going down there to join the delegation. What does that even mean? What does he think he's going to do? Like, it sounds so stupid to me. Like the essence of virtue signaling. Like, I don't know. It's just, and no wonder the cult is as strong and growing as it is. It's just, and why would anyone in Gaza resist with this kind of crap going on in the world? The people that are supposed to understand rights, and they're siding with the terrorists. So it's just such a despicable situation.
Yeah, it's something which that'd be good to get to the root of. And in a sense is what, I keep picking up this book by Dave Richard I'm reading. He's kind of digging into why, does the British left especially get so activated about this? I don't know if it's because of Britain's role in the creation of Israel, or, with the Balfour Declaration, or, with the British mandate in Palestine. I don't know if that's why, if it's kind of a legacy of guilt about it. I have no idea. But Corbyn does represent a long line of kind of lefty politicians who are very, very passionate about this. And we've spoken about George Galloway on the channel as well, who's very much like this, and who basically hasn't met an authoritarian regime in the Middle East who he doesn't approve of. He was once thrown a kind of parade by Saddam Hussein in Iraq. That's just how charming and lovely some of these people on the British left are. Anyway, we've got 2 minutes left of the show. So we'll just go around. Where can everyone find you on social media, the stuff you do? So Michael, I'll start with you.
You can find me on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It's The Rational Egoist. And I do a lot of interviews with professors, economists, politicians, and we talk about ideas.
There was a really good one you did the other day about was it 17th century history? I really liked that one. So that one was very good.
Glorious Revolution, yeah.
Yeah. Jonathan, where can people find you?
People can find me on Substack. I have a blog. It's called Philosophy I Need It, or they can search my name. I also have a YouTube under the same name, and you can find me on X under my name, Jonathan Dawn. Thank you.
And John, where can people find you? Where can they buy your paintings?
A couple places. I have a page on Facebook and a page on Instagram. Just look up WOSART, WOSART. And that's also my website. And I also have paintings and stained glass for sale at Quincoder Fine Art in Wyoming and California, which you can up their website too.
Very good. You can also find my Twitter in the description. I haven't tweeted forever, but I'm going to start doing that again. Or it's X now, isn't it? You can't call it Twitter.
You're Xing.
My X. That sounds so rubbish. It's such a bad kind of branding move, isn't it?
Yes.
You can also find my Substack. I've been promising an article forever, which was meant to go up this morning, but I've been really busy, called The Ruins of Civilization and Cultural Change. That'll go up tomorrow. I promise. I'm going to get on it. If you're subscribed now, you'll get it in your inbox in the morning. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. And everyone, we'll see you tomorrow on The Reality Show, and we'll see you later.
Take care.
All right, cheers.